This is a bonus episode of the Virtual Memories Show podcast. It's been a week since I recorded the Finding Michael Denneny podcast, where I talked about the experience of showing up at Michael's home on April 15th to record a conversation, only to find him dead. It's a longer story than that, but you can go back and listen to that one. Rather than rehashing all of that and everything in sort of bits and pieces in the weekly email or Substack, I thought I'd write something that could serve as a last word, and then I thought it'd make more sense to do it as a monologue, so here we are. So when I recorded last week, it was less than 24 hours after we discovered Michael's body, and I think I was most affected by the idea that he had been lying dead for days in his apartment, and I was devastated, I think, at the sadness of his being alone and dying alone. And that got to me as I was leaving the apartment and heading back to the garage and seeing all these people in New York. And well, again, I go into that in that big monologue last week. The good thing was, or lucky for me, whatever, as the news got out and his friends and colleagues and loved ones listened to my episode about it, some of them got in touch with me, and a couple of them, well, they set me straight. They let me know that Michael was in touch with lots of people, had regular calls, nights out, plans for theater and opera and other stuff, and holiday visits and such with friends. And just because a few days went by without a call, it's not like he was alone. And that helped me. That made me feel a lot better. And the other side of it was a lot of them told me how much they appreciated the personal human version of that day that I provided, rather than just finding out from a newspaper obit or police report or something. So it was a tough experience last week, and I know you could tell that if you listen to me cry and rage on that episode I made, but I'm glad that what I did or what I made from it has helped other people. And if someone had to serve to be the role of accidental witness to this whole thing, I guess I'm glad it was me, because I was able to make something that helped his friends and helped his colleagues and all the people he knew and helped over the years. And those messages that they sent me really meant a lot. A lot of these guys told me stories about Michael and the importance of his life. And some were from authors whose books he bought, not just the gay authors, but, we'll just say authors of other risky books, that they weren't necessarily in the gay imprint that he ran. And also, two of the last people to talk with him wrote to tell me about their regular get-togethers with him. We kind of worked through timelines, and both of them figured out that they spoke to him Tuesday night, and it's probable, based on all the newspapers that were piled up outside his door, that Michael had died sometime Tuesday into Wednesday. So they were likely the last people to talk to him, but they did get to talk to him and share the friendship and love that they had. And one of those guys actually sent me photos of Michael playing with his little kid on Easter, the friend's little kid on Easter, as well as pics of Michael in his apartment. The apartment I went into briefly during that whole thing. And it's going to sound weird, but I really appreciated the apartment photos just because they helped me kind of solidify the memory of just stepping in there for, maybe a minute on Saturday, just standing in that, well, we'll say study or office room and kind of orienting myself spatially and all this. And the pictures this guy sent kind of helped me. Well, it's a memory palace sort of thing. You know what I mean? And the thing was, another guy wrote me while I was traveling for a day last week. And he was down in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to write to tell me all about Michael's recent appearance at Politics and Prose, the great bookstore down there, and all the time Michael gave to this young poli-sci student for an interview about gay rights and activism and the history that Michael lived through. I don't have the email in front of me, but basically he said this wasn't going to sell one extra copy of On Christopher Street, but it was important to him to share that mission. So coming out of it all, I got to say, I felt even more regret at never getting to meet and talk to Michael, because this is going to sound pompous or whatever. I feel like we were kind of engaged in the same mission in a way, that preserving and promoting culture that I always mention at the beginning of regular episodes. In his case, there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, he was helping shape gay male culture, literary and otherwise, from the 70s and beyond. But on a fundamental level, it sure sounds like we both live to do the same thing. And the response from all those people who knew him, some of whom hadn't been in touch with him for decades, but wanted to write me to tell me how much he meant to their lives and their careers and all that, just tells me not just that his life was a success, but, in some weird way, maybe what I've been doing these past 10 or 11 years hasn't been a waste either. Now, in addition to all the notes I got from his friends and colleagues, I also heard from a bunch of my regular listeners, so people who didn't know Michael at all, but wanted to express their sympathy, let me know how bad they felt for me, and I tried to write back to each of them individually. I didn't want to just copy and paste something. Sometimes it was just thanks, friend, and I would come up with a little extra bit of a note. And I think I was doing that because maybe in the process, iteratively of responding to all those people, I might write something kind of meaningful. And it was middle of last week when I think that happened. I wrote to this one pal after thanking her. I wrote, "I'm so gratified by the response from his friends and colleagues and the thanks they gave me for doing whatever I did and the stories they've shared with me about him. It's like I gave them a context for his death, and they keep giving me the context of his life." And that's probably as well as I'm ever going to be able to put it. Although there is one more thing I want to add that I didn't get to last. It didn't occur to me when I was recording the monologue because I was so shell-shocked at that point. My experience last weekend was easy compared to situations my friends have gone through. At least two of my friends have been the first one in, who discovered a loved one, boyfriend and best friend in these two cases, who'd been dead for a couple of days. I got off easy, all things considered. I did not know Michael personally. The police went in first, knew what was there. I still went in after when I, procedurally shouldn't have, but whatever. But these friends of mine, I mean, they were the ones who actually walked in and found the person they love. I think in both cases, the person they love most in the world, they found dead on the floor. What I had to deal with, it's what comes before that. In this case, the locked door and the pile of newspapers lying in front of it and the lack of response and what you're supposed to do in that sort of situation. Now, as ever, anybody who knows me knows I will devalue any trauma I undergo because I know other people have had it worse. Doesn't mean I don't believe I went through something. It just means I try to keep it in perspective, But for anyone who asks how I'm doing in the wake of last week, and a bunch of people have asked, I am weirdly okay. I mean, the enormity of it is there, but I don't feel it as trauma exactly, if that makes sense. My suspicion is that the response from his friends and colleagues helped me, but also that just the very act of recording my thoughts about it and all that crying in rage I mentioned, and putting it out in the world. All of that helped. It helped me in a way that maybe I wouldn't have been as good if I was talking one-on-one to people. I did mention on Twitter and various platforms, whatever, a couple of days ago that it occurred to me that outside of my wife, I hadn't actually talked to anyone about this stuff or anything else for most of that week. Had a business trip, had a check-in with my lobbyist, but didn't really talk about this stuff, which could mean I'm just bottling everything up. But I really suspect that, well, I've joked with guests that my podcast can be like a therapy session, but the idea is that it's therapy for them, not me. But there you are. Anyway, thanks for listening. We'll be back with a regular episode of the Virtual Memories Show this week. I've recorded it on Saturday. It was a remote session, not in person, so I didn't have to deal with any of the weirdness of showing up at someone else's door. That's going to happen this Thursday, actually, when I've got an in-person one after a trade show in New York City. But we will be back this week with a full-length episode featuring Ho Che Anderson. Meanwhile, thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you wrote to me in the past week, thank you. If you knew Michael, I'm very sorry for your loss. And, I'm glad I could do whatever I did if it helps you at all.